Does the world need another twin flame channel? The answer to that is no. Is the world about to get another twin flame channel? And yeah, sorry in advance. So the reason I felt compelled to start this is that I have recently begun what I believe is my personal awakening, and it is a doozy. Life is never going to be the same. The telepathy, the synchronicities, the astral sex, the mental looping, 333, the astral sex. Yes, I said it, the astral sex. The feeling of inner knowing that he is one day coming back to me, coupled with the matrix reality that I may never actually see him in the 3D ever again. So my journey started about 4 months ago, May 5th to be exact, when an ex-boyfriend of mine popped into my mind out of nowhere. Or, what I should say, is his energy had taken up space and pulled up a chair. It was as if he was sitting in the room with me and I could feel his every emotion. He missed me. He had regrets. I could feel that he loved me so much more than he had ever let on. I had not spoken to him in 16 years outside of a couple of Facebook messages. Now, I had thought of this man in passing from time to time, but it was usually from a pretty detached place. And I want to be honest with you, he had broken my heart into pieces. And I put a lot of mental and emotional labor in to heal from him. Now, other relationships I'd been in, it usually took me about a year to bounce back from, but this one lingered in the back of my mind for years and took me to some dark places in the aftermath. It took so long to get over him, but eventually I did. I was very committed to that healing process. This time around, though, when I was thinking of him, something was different. It was no longer from that detached, healed, I'm over it place. I felt like I was feeling his actual thoughts and feelings. Now, what was interesting is that this very man had energetically tapped me on the shoulder a few months prior. But a few months prior, when I felt it, I sent his energy back to him. I said, I don't want it, go back. But this time around, it felt as if he wanted his presence known. Now, granted, Mercury was in retrograde, but something about this was unique. I felt like he was coming back to me, and I had actually experienced this gut feeling with platonic friends before when I hadn't seen them in a while, and then only to reunite with them in 3D. So I got excited, really, really excited. But before I get ahead of myself, we need to go backwards a bit. So 6 weeks prior to this energetic meeting with him, I started seeing the number 333 everywhere. Now, I want you to remember 333 because it's going to come up a lot in future videos. I had been living with my mom as I moved back home during the pandemic, and all of a sudden my life was pretty suburban and pretty boring. I had moved back into my childhood home from New York City, and now I was living in a suburb where I had no friends, no car, and I never learned how to drive when I was in New York City. But still, I made the best of it. I kept in touch with my friends from all over the world, and of course, watched a lot of YouTube. But what I would do, I would take several walks around the neighborhood throughout the day. I would get this urge to go outside, and I would see a parked car with 333 on the license plate, or a moving car with 333 on the license plate. It started popping up a lot, or I would see it on someone's shirt while I was walking down the street. And it was always when I just had this sudden urge to leave the house. Now, I had experienced angel numbers in the past. I knew something epic was on the way. I knew that some kind of change was on the way, but I didn't know what. So, as I sat with this feeling 6 weeks later of my ex-lover energetically sitting in the room with me, I decided to look him up on social media. Now, it had been over a decade since I looked him up. And as I mentioned, he broke my heart. So I made it a point not to go on social media. Now, normally I would go to Facebook and look at a few photos and call it a day. But this particular day, however, I decided to look him up on YouTube. I had never done this before. My intuition just told me to go to YouTube instead. He was a musician, so I thought it could be fun to maybe, look him up playing in one of the bands that I remember him playing with, just to go down memory lane. I wasn't thinking a whole lot of it, and I wasn't planning on staying on social media for very long. I could not have prepared myself for what I was about to find. I found a podcast episode where he was the guest. It was very obscure. It had about 17 views on it, and it was 53 minutes and 33 seconds long. Yep, the timestamp said 5333, and it had recently been uploaded. I couldn't believe my luck. I was going to get a whole podcast of him speaking rather than just, looking at a few photos or looking at a video. And so what was interesting is that this podcast centered around his current day job outside of music, which was a field that I also had previously worked in. The last time I had seen him was a few months after our breakup, which was 16 years ago. And I remember at this particular meeting, he had asked me for his advice concerning this new job of his that would eventually go on to be his career. But I realized he was just looking for an excuse to see me because he had other people he could go to. But 16 years ago, as I was giving him this advice, I had no idea that this would be the last time I would see and speak to him in person. He fell in love with someone else later on in that year and moved across the country to be with her, which of course was devastating to me because I couldn't come up with the excuse that he's not ready in a relationship. He left me and eventually fell in love with her. So of course I had made it a point not to check his social media back then so I could move on. So as I'm listening to this podcast, I learned some things about his childhood that I didn't know before, and he spoke in depth about the time period that he and I had dated. Not about me. I want to make it clear, he did not bring me up at all, which, of course was disappointing because I literally helped him get into this career. But he talked about what was going on in his life at that time. He talked about the band he was in that I had seen many times, the temp job he worked at before switching to his current career. Yes, the career I give him advice on. And, I did think maybe he'd mention me, but that didn't happen. He did, however, speak about meeting the girl he met after me and moving across the country to be with her and then getting deeper into this new career across the country. I learned all about her and that their relationship lasted 4 years, and he spoke about her in such loving detail that I could see why he moved across the country to be with her. To be honest, she sounded incredible. But, things took a turn. They eventually did break up. And what I did not know was that he had some massive success with music and toured the world for a period of time. For this period of about 3-4 years, he was very successful. And I was happy that he had that experience because that was the dream for both of us. Now, in the podcast, David spoke of the new city that he moved to, the end of his success in the music industry. He's still in music, but, it plays a different role in his life now. He spoke of the company that he was working for now, and he even mentioned his work schedule. So it wasn't a typical 9 to 5. He just mentioned it in passing. And I could not believe that I now had all these details about his life. I knew where he lived, where he worked, and when he worked there. But I thought about it and I felt that I must have had some kind of psychic sense about the existence of this podcast. And it was so amazing to hear his voice. So after listening to the podcast, I went to his Facebook page for the first time in over a decade to see photos of him playing music all over the world and living his dream. And I thought, you know what? Let's look at some old messages between us, going down memory lane. And after the breakup, we only messaged each other a handful of times, but there was an old Facebook thread between us. And the last one was in 2009 when he actually messaged me first. I looked at my response that I sent to him and I could not believe my eyes. I sent it to him at 3:33 p.m. Yeah, 3:33 p.m. So at this point, I was like, oh yeah, he's coming back into my life. And I was certain that the 3-3 signs were about this. So I'm feeling 333. I'm feeling reunion. So I go on Google. I Google 333 reunion. And the following comes up. Twin flames. It started to make sense. So I had heard of twin flames before, but I had not paid too much attention to it. But all of a sudden, it felt like it was falling into place, and thus began my journey. And this journey has been a wild one, to say the least, and so much has happened since this day 4 months ago. And what I learned from going on the internet is this is a phenomenon other people have experienced and are currently experiencing. And I know twin flame stories differ, but they do have some common threads. So I'm going to talk to you all about my twin flame symptoms and the various channels that I have discovered on YouTube to help me make sense of this journey. I want to be transparent and admit to you that this experience felt quite supernatural. I did not feel grounded at first. I felt like I was losing my mind and that I was floating. And almost a spiritual psychosis, to be honest. But what I learned was that I was not alone, and it was part of the journey. So what I am hoping is that this journey helps others, and no, you're not going crazy. Something is going on. In the next video, I'm going to be beginning 16 years ago and tell you a little bit about how that journey first started, how I got to the place that I am today. And from there, I will be sharing my journey in real time as I'm still figuring out what it all means. Now, in a perfect world, I would love to tell you that I am getting back together with him and that I'm going to reunite with him and all that good stuff, but we don't really know if that's the case. But there's a lesson and meaning in this story, and it's one that I'm still searching for. So hopefully we can figure out the meaning together. Thank you so much for listening to the first episode of Not Another Twin Flame podcast. And if you have any story that relates to anything that I'm talking about, please leave it in the comments below. I want to hear your comments. And if you could like and subscribe, that would be amazing. I know that there's a lot of twin flame information out there, and I believe for anyone going through this journey, that you should hear it from all angles, from all experiences, and then just take what resonates with you and leave the rest. Thank you.